What's up? Today we're going to talk about great self-control and incredible survival under certain conditions, circumstances where it was just about impossible to survive. But people in this video, well, they did just that and lived to tell the story. Be sure to watch this video to the end. Let's start. The story of Mowgli. A lot of people know about Mowgli, a child raised by beasts in the jungle. You must have heard of him.
Relax, kid. No need to get worked up, okay?
Must have watched a cartoon or a movie or even read a book about the real story. Of course, this one didn't inspire Kipling, but just imagine a woman who spent most of her childhood in the company of monkeys. Marina Chapman was about 5 years old when she was suddenly kidnapped. She was taken right from the garden outside her parents' house in Colombia. This happened around 1954, although Marina herself can only give approximate dates. She was one of many children who were then abducted by unknown people. It's not clear what the reason for the abduction was. Maybe the perpetrators wanted a ransom, but then suddenly they gave up their plan. Anyway, they didn't want Marina. The little girl was just dumped in the middle of the jungle at night, all alone. Listen, it's scary even for an adult to imagine such a thing. Marina would probably have died in a couple of days, but suddenly she had company in the form of capuchins. These small monkeys took an interest in Marina, the human cub. They taught Marina to get food and take care of herself, not on purpose, just by example. They even showed the girl how to heal when she had a stomach ache. Over time, Marina began to recognize the monkeys by their faces, so to speak. The animals weren't happy or upset that they were joined by a human cub, but the girl was delighted. She felt like she was part of the tribe. She learned to climb trees over time, and she even forgot human speech. Eventually, Marina had spent 5 years in the jungle. That's 5 years eating berries, roots, and bananas. 5 years in the wild, where every day could have been her last. Eventually, Marina was found by hunters. They brought her back to the human world. There were other problems, of course. The Mowgli girl had a hard time adjusting to normal life. At the age of 14, Marina had a foster mother. Later, she moved to Britain, where she happily married and gave birth to 2 daughters. She published her autobiography, The Girl with No Name.
A girl has no name.
No, not that girl with no name. 3 days underwater. For many people, the fear of drowning is one of the strongest fears. The story of Harrison Okini ended well, but it doesn't make it any less terrifying. Okini worked as a cook on a small Jackson 4 ship. It's not really a dangerous thing to do. Well, until one day, that is, when a big storm came up and waves turned the ship over and sent it to the bottom. This happened about 12.4 miles off the Nigerian coast. 11 crew members died. The tragedy happened at 5 o'clock in the morning. Most likely, no one had ever expected the sea to be so vile. Okini was the only one who survived. He was inside a small air bubble that was gradually filling with water. Everything around him was black and noisy. The guy didn't realize how much time had passed and whether there was even a chance for salvation. He felt hunger, thirst, and intense fear. Also, it was cold. The water temperature at the bottom was not pleasant. Besides, the guy was dressed only in shorts and he could hardly move. Okini was just waiting and praying, hearing predatory fish eating his friends' bodies. It had been almost 60 hours since the Jackson 4 had been wrecked, and when the divers reached the ship, they were supposed to get the bodies to the surface, but they knocked on the ship just in case. Imagine their surprise when they heard that somebody knocked back. It clearly wasn't a barracuda, and when the divers got closer to the poor cook, well, they thought he was the living dead.
He's alive. Okay, keep him there.
We don't know if Okini at first thought the divers were his hallucinations, but they still managed to get the poor cook out of his trap. But despite being rescued, Okini was still at risk of having absorbed a lethal amount of nitrogen. So to avoid the casein disease, he was placed in a decompression chamber for 2 days. The very fact that Okini spent so much time at such a great depth and stayed alive is a real miracle, and I don't think anybody's gonna gonna argue with that. An amazing story, isn't it? Hey, haven't you subscribed to the channel yet? We need to fix this now. Survivors in the mountains. One of the most memorable yet terrifying stories of survival occurred in 1972. The Fairchild FH-227D of the Uruguayan Air Force flew on the Montevideo-Mendoza-Santiago route, but the inexperienced co-pilot began to decline early, and as a result, the plane hit a mountain and crashed in the Andes near the border between Argentina and Chile. 3 crew members and 8 passengers died immediately, while several others died a little while later due to injuries and extremely low temperatures. It was very cold in the mountains.
The first night was horrible. People screaming, people dying.
And the people didn't have warm clothes or shoes with them, and they didn't have any mountaineering equipment to climb down. Survivors expected to be found, but after 142 hours and 30 minutes of searching, the rescue workers concluded that there was no hope. The search was stopped, and the unfortunate people abandoned in the mountains knew about it. They had received information from a small transistor radio, and now they found themselves in the middle of snow-covered mountains with virtually no food or medicine. Here's a not-so-fun fact. When the temperature reaches minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, you can lose your mind from horror. These people had to die, but they survived. Of the 45 people on the plane, 16 were able to escape. 2 of them were able to get to human settlements and bring help to the others. It happened 72 days after the crash. That's 72 days of icy terror in the middle of mountain peaks. Captured by the Sea. Steve Callahan is an American yachtsman and the author of Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea. And as you can see, he chose that title for a reason. In the autumn of 1981, Steven sailed out of Newport on a 21-foot sloop Napoleon Solo. He was going to race, but he dropped out of the race because of the breakage, and then he got caught in a big storm. Most likely at that very moment, a whale rammed the sloop and it went down. Steven had to move on an Avon inflatable lifeboat designed for 6 people. He had navigation charts, a harpoon gun, 2 solar water desalters, and a sleeping bag. He also had a book on high sea survival and some other random things. The current was slowly carrying the raft. Steven was hunting fish and birds, gathering drinking water, and hoping for salvation, but he wasn't counting on it. Steven thought that he could only rely on himself. He was exercising and repairing his equipment. He was just ready to do anything to not go crazy from idleness. In 76 days, an entire ecosystem had developed around the raft that attracted not only birds but also sharks. Anyway, it was a serious challenge. In the end, Steven was rescued by sailors. By that time, he had lost 1/3 of his body weight and he was covered in blisters because of the seawater. He was immediately taken to the hospital, but ever the survivor, Steven left it the very same night. The yachtsman spent the following weeks recovering on the island, and he hitched a ride on boats through the West Indies. Amazing man. Despite the harsh ordeals, Steven still enjoys sailing and the sea. Nothing can stop him. The Grand Canyon Test. In August 1975, a 25-year-old girl named Linda Sfarna walked across the Grand Canyon with her dog. She had just planned to walk to the next village, but she accidentally took a wrong turn, and she got lost. The Grand Canyon is one of the deepest canyons in the world. It's 277 miles long and 18 miles wide. Anyway, it's not hard to get lost in a place like this, but it's a test that you wouldn't want to wish on your worst enemy. And suddenly, Linda was without food and water and without a roof over her head, under the burning sun. The temperature was then up to 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night, it was dropping to 50 degrees. Add the wild animals in there, and you have one of the creepiest places in the world. For 20 days, Linda was surviving in a labyrinth of death. This was an environment where any other person would have died long ago. She was tormented by hunger, thirst, hallucinations, and despair. One day, the dog accidentally turned over the container where the girl was collecting water, and when Linda screamed, the dog got scared and escaped. Several times, Linda thought of giving up, but she continued to fight for her life, and it wasn't in vain. In the end, her tracks were noticed by the locals, and they managed to track down the lost girl. But the most amazing thing was they were able to find the dog as well. Linda and her pet returned home. Trapped. Being inside a shipwreck is not an easy test. Surviving in the middle of snow-capped mountains is worse than that. But sometimes, the danger lies in the most unexpected things like ATVs. Ken Hildebrand did his hunting about 80 miles from Calgary, Canada. He had done this 1,000 times before, but it didn't go according to plan that day. Ken was riding an ATV and accidentally crashed into a rock. His heavy transport turned over, and it clamped the man's legs in such a way that he couldn't get out. Some levers would have come in handy, but there was nothing suitable. Ken was all alone with the wildlife and his own problems. It's worth saying that wildlife immediately took an interest in the man. Wolves and coyotes were always trying to get close to him. They must have wanted to use Ken as an appetizer. He chased them away with a loud whistling, but the predators weren't his only problem. Cold, hunger, and thirst just wore Ken out. He literally ate dirt to get at least some moisture. Try to imagine that without getting nauseous. The hunger was so strong that the man tried to eat a beaver he'd caught the day before, but Ken just couldn't. His body refused to digest raw, rotting meat, and eventually Ken was trapped for 96 hours, and he would have probably died if it hadn't been for the occasional traveler with dog in tow who appeared near there. It wasn't the traveler, his dog, or even coyotes who were most surprised by what happened. The director of medical emergency services was also shot. According to him, Ken just shouldn't have survived. Not under these extreme conditions, but he did survive. And here's a fun fact. Ken's wife didn't even know her husband was missing. The hospital staff informed her about the incident. Well, that's it for today. Try to stay away from ATVs, the Grand Canyon, boats, trying to be a cook. Oh, and hey, if you can't just help being the adventurous type and get lost or stranded, never give up hope. And remember to like our videos.